Welcome back, Hornets. We are ready for another workbook lesson today. Today we're going to be looking at part 2 of lesson 13A in your Ready workbook. We're going to be on page 138. So if you don't have your workbook out, take a minute to pause the video and gather your materials and make sure you are ready. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do, guys, I'm going to rewrite the title of the lesson up at the top of the page. I know that's always the first thing I have to do. And the title of this lesson is Analyzing the Impact of Word Choice. So let me get this up here for us. Analyzing the impact of word choice. Okay, so now let's start breaking apart this title. We know analyzing means to figure something out. And we know this word impact focuses on the effect or how something is changed or influenced. And word choice, well, based on what we talked about yesterday, we know word choice can affect what the author means. Or word choice can help dictate what the author means as the reader sees it. So I'm going to make myself a note that it helps us figure out what the author means. And during this lesson, we're going to look at a few different examples of word choice. So just a few that we're going to look at are figurative language, connotative language. We'll also look at sound devices. So repetition, alliteration, assonance. And we may also take a look at some literary devices. So anytime we are looking at different types of word choice, especially with figurative connotative language and with sound device, we know the author's word choice works together to help create tone. So we know our tone, we usually describe it as positive, negative, or neutral, and then we take it a step further. We also look at the author's specific word choice to decide whether or not their word choice is strong or weak. Because we know some words are definitely stronger than others. Right, so we have broken apart our title pretty good, I think. So let's go ahead and look at our directions for part 2. So we know we're going to have to read this story about a young servant woman traveling with a princess. All right, so this seems like it's going to be pretty interesting. So I know I've got to read the story, and I already kind of know what the story's about. I know it's about a young servant woman who's traveling with a princess. So automatically, I'm kind of getting, I'm almost getting like Prince and the Pauper vibes. We've got someone who's a servant, so they work for the princess, but servants don't usually get paid, right? So we know that that's what our story is going to be about. So we kind of already have an idea about our characters. And if you look over to the side, we know the genre of this story is realistic fiction. So it's been a bit since we have looked at something that's realistic fiction. So let's take a minute to remind ourselves some qualities of realistic fiction. So we know that realistic fiction is fiction, so that means it's not real. And we know that the purpose of anything that is fiction is to entertain the reader. So we know the story we're going to look at today is fiction, so it's not real, and the purpose of it is to entertain the reader. So texts that are realistic fiction, they have characters, they have a setting, they have a plot, they have conflict, they have theme, just like any other fictional text that we've been looking at. The difference with a realistic fiction, though, is all of that is realistic. So the characters have to be realistic, like they could really be in real life. The setting has to be realistic, so it can't have magic and dragons and superpowers. It can't have any of that. The conflict that the characters are dealing with, so the problem that the main character faces, has to be realistic. So they have to have a real problem. Um, and just the overall plot of the story has to be realistic. If it's not realistic, if it's not something that could happen in real life, we know it doesn't fit into this genre of realistic fiction. So I'm going to make myself a note that says that realistic fiction could happen in real life. So all the things that we're going to read about could happen in real life, but they don't because it's fiction. But it could because it's realistic fiction. All right, you also have source book notes on realistic fiction. If you would like, this would be a great time for you to go back and refresh yourself on those. But I think we've covered our basics for that. So now we're ready to move on toward the story. The title of this story is The View from the Carriage. So I'm going to box in the title of my story. And this story is by Wendell Riley. So I know that's my author. And once again, our title, The View from the Carriage. So a carriage, if you did not know, um, is usually like a little compartment on wheels that's pulled by a horse or like a mule or something like that. So carriages were used as a way to travel back in ye olden times. So we don't really use carriages to get around today, but we know that carriages in the past, that was a very common method of travel. People used them, especially if they were wealthy, they were rich, they had money, they could afford a carriage, they could afford horses to pull the carriage. So far, that definitely fits in with what our directions told us about a servant woman traveling with a princess. So I could probably make an assumption, right, that they're traveling in this carriage. Um, and maybe I know it's the view from the carriage, so maybe they're looking out the window. I probably could make the assumption also that the princess owns the carriage, but we shall see. So our paragraphs are already numbered for us, so we don't have to worry about doing that. And um, I know that this is going to be continued from the on the next page. So it doesn't tell us that as it usually does, but I'm going to write down at the bottom that this is going to be continued um on the next page. So the first thing we're going to do, guys, we are going to take a minute to read this once. We're going to do a cold reading just to wrap our brains around what it's telling us. And then we are going to come back and look for specific things in the story, but we will get to that whenever it's time. So, I'm going to read this out loud to you. And I want you to follow along. And I just want you to follow along and just think about the story as we read. The View from the Carriage by Wendell Riley. As the horse-drawn carriage passed through the castle's main gates, rattled down the stone-paved drive, and then turned north onto the road through the countryside, Anna felt her spirits soar. This road was no ordinary road. It was the road that led back home, the road that passed the cottage of her birth, the road that brought her to her old life. Her joy was boundless, but she knew she must hide those feelings from Princess Sophia, who expected her personal servant to be perpetually poised, proper, and silent. Anna turned toward the window to hide her glee. How beautiful the world outside the castle. How beautiful the world was outside the castle's walls. Scattered clouds in the serene sky cast soft shadows over the green grassy pastures. The sun beamed dreamily on a happily burbling stream. The good weather meant that Anna might glimpse more than her family's farmhouse. It meant that she might actually see them, if only for a moment, working the fields. Okay. So this is our story, The View from the Carriage, which we know is about the servant woman and the princess. So let's talk about our characters. So the servant woman, we just found out her name is Anna. Maybe Anna, I'm not sure, but I'll say Anna. So we know she's the servant. The princess, they refer to her as Princess Sophia. So those are our characters. So I'm going to go ahead and circle those because I know they are important. So I'm good. I know that Princess Anna is my protagonist, which is another word for main character. So the story is all about her, right? And she is traveling with the princess. She's the servant, right? And she's looking out the window. And as she rides, she notices the road that they're on is the road that leads back to her home, right? So her home before she was with Princess Sophia. No, she's really excited to see this road, and have the chance to glimpse her house. But she has to make sure that she stays silent and poised and proper for Princess Sophia, because Princess Sophia wants her servant to be very silent and proper. So she tries to hide her excitement and hopes that she's going to get a good glimpse of her family working in the fields. So let's go ahead and take a minute now that we know what the story is all about. We've recapped it. Let's take a minute and try to figure out the author's tone for this passage. We know tone is very significant for us, especially when we're dealing with word choice as we are in this lesson. So let's take a minute to look at the author's word choice and figure out what his overall tone for this passage is. So I want you to take a minute, look through the passage, see what words you can come up with that help us figure out the tone. All right, so let's see. I'm going to point out a few that I found. The ones that you found may be a little bit different, but I noticed this word soar here. It's talking about how her spirit soared. Soar means like it's flying. It's like above the clouds. Almost like it's gliding. That has very positive tone. So that word soar. We also have this phrase here. Her joy was boundless. So boundless means that it has no borders. There's nothing containing it. So if her joy is boundless, it means it's almost there's so much of it that she can't contain it. So that's positive, right? That phrase. Um, but we also have this phrase here. It's talking about how she must hide those feelings, right? So if you're trying to hiding something, usually that's not a very good feeling for us. We have to, if we're trying to hide something, we want to be cautious, right? And then it also refers to her as the servant. If you are a servant, it means that you don't get to do whatever you want to do. You have to focus on whoever it is you're serving, and that kind of has negative connotation. In paragraph 2, we have this phrase, hide her glee. So glee is joy or excitement, and that has positive tone, but we know she's hiding her glee. So that kind of has some negative tone to it. Um and then of course it's describing how beautiful the outside world is. We know that the scene that they're looking at as they travel is very beautiful. So beautiful has positive connotation. We also have this word serene. um, Serene, we know, is positive. It means it's very peaceful, very pretty to look at. And it also is talking about how the sun is beaming dreamily on happy, burbling streams. That's all positive. So it's like the stream is happy, which is good. Beaming is good. So there's a lot of positive connotation going on here, a lot of tone, positive tone. But also we know that she's trying to hide these feelings, and that's kind of negative. So I'm gonna say that the overall tone of this is definitely it's more positive than negative, but there is some negative in there too. So the tone is it's a lot of positive, and we know that she is excited yet restrained or almost cautious. because she doesn't want her feelings to show. All right, so now that we've discussed tone, let's go back and talk about some of these sound devices that we got to start discussing yesterday. And I'm going to change the color of my pen so I can make sure I keep this separate. I'm going to do this in blue. Yeah, there we go. All right, so we're going to go ahead and start talking about some of these sound devices. So the three that we focused on yesterday were repetition, alliteration, and assonance. All three of those function as repetition. So assonance and alliteration, they're just different types of repetition. It still has to do with different things that are repeating. We've got our vowel sound and our consonant sound. But it's all repetition. And we talked about how yesterday, repetition helps us discover tone, right? So we're going to try to take this a step further and we're going to talk about our tone and how our those sound devices help to get across the overall meaning of the text. So let's take a minute in paragraph number 1 and look for some words that are repeating. Let's look for our repeating words first. And there are several that I noticed in paragraph 1. This paragraph talks about how they are traveling on the countryside, and it keeps referring back to that road that they are on. It says they turn north onto the road through the countryside, and Anna felt her spirits soar. This road was no ordinary road. It was the road that led back to her home, the road that passed the cottage of her birth, the road that brought her back to her old life. So it keeps repeating that word road. So we know that when an author is repeating anything in their text, we know that they are trying to add emphasis. So they are trying to bring our attention to this word road. There's something very important going on here on this road, and the author wants to make sure that we understand what it is. And what's happening on this road? Well, they're traveling through the countryside, right? But there's something special. This road leads back to Anna's home, the place that she was born, where she is originally from, and that's making her excited, right? So now that we have found some repeating words, let's go ahead and look for some examples of alliteration. Alliteration is the repetition of our consonant sound, that initial consonant sound, or the repetition of the consonant sound and stressed syllables. So I noticed this example of alliteration in paragraph 1. It says personal servant to be perpetually poised proper. What consonant sound do you notice that's getting repeated there? That p sound and personal, perpetually poised proper. We've got that hard consonant sound p getting repeated. P, 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 right there. So I'm going to circle those in blue. So this is an example of alliteration, that hard p sound being repeated. And we know that consonant sound that's getting repeated, it contributes to the tone. So we know that here it's talking about how she's the personal servant and she's expected to be perpetually poised, proper, and silent. So perpetually means that you have to always be a certain way. So she always has to be poised and proper, because she is the personal servant, right? So that kind of contributes to the overall tone of our text by showing that she has to be very stiff and rigid almost. All right, so let's look now for a few examples of assonance. This is the one that's new to us. So we are looking for a repetition of vowel sounds here. And there are quite a few in paragraph 2 that I noticed. One good example I found was the repetition of the E sound. It's mostly here, with beamed dreamily on a happy burbling stream. So in beamed, we have that repeating E sound. It's there in dreamily as well. And stream, that E sound is getting repeated. This vowel sound that's getting repeated kind of, it's almost like, it's kinda relaxing to me when it's talking about the sun beamed dreamily on a happily burbling stream. Well, we know that this sentence itself is very positive, right? But it kinda almost brings to mind the imagery of, like, just water gently flowing, it's kind of relaxing and cool in a way. So, that's one example. There's also this sound getting repeated in family, happily, bubbling, which is in the same sentence, and that contributes to the tone as well, that, nice, happy, relaxed feeling. And I have noticed also in paragraph 2, one example of alliteration I didn't point out, we have here, kind of a repetition of this "g" sound, green, grassy. And then here we have good. So green, grassy, good, and glimpse right there. So those are all pretty close. That could function as alliteration too. I just wanted to point that one out. That one's kind of this just describing the scenery, right? It contributes to that. So I think that we have done a pretty good job. We've talked about what's going on in the story. We've talked about tone. We've pointed out some of our tone words and phrases. We found examples of our sound devices. So now let's move on down to the bottom of the page and see what we have to do next. So my directions tell me that I have to explore how to answer this question. And the question says, how does the author use word repetition, alliteration, and assonance to describe Anna's carriage ride with the princess? So I'm looking for word repetition, alliteration, and assonance to describe her carriage ride with the princess. So I'm going to make myself a note out to the side here so I know that all of these things work together to create unity in meaning and tone. That's the purpose. Unity in meaning and tone. So, assonance, alliteration, and word repetition all work together to create unity in meaning and tone. So we have to find examples of word repetition, alliteration, and assonance in the story, and then we have to complete the chart below. So we've done this already. We found word repetition, we found alliteration, and we found assonance. And now we just have to complete the chart. So let's go back up and look at our examples. Let's refresh ourselves. We had word repetition with the word road in paragraph 1. We had a couple of examples of alliteration. We had the p sound in personal, perpetually poised, and proper. And we also had our g alliteration with green, grassy, right? And we had our assonance with the the repetition of the e sound and beamed, dreamily, and stream. So those are a few good examples. So now let's move on down to our chart. So the chart has 3 columns, 3 rows. The first column is the device. So this is the sound device specifically that we would use. So these are our sound devices. In the second column, we have the example from the text, and then the last column focuses on the impact on meaning or tone. So, how the sound devices impact the meaning or the tone of the text. So, let's go ahead and look at the first column. The device and the example are already filled out for us, so let's review. This device is word repetition, so the repeating of words. The example says that the word road is repeated 6 times. So that's a lot. So the authors are really trying to draw our attention to this word road. We know that authors repeat stuff to add emphasis, so the impact on meaning or tone should have something to do with that. And I'm going to say that they emphasize the author uses this word road multiple times to draw our attention to it, so that we recognize the importance of this road to Anna. So I'm going to say the author, Riley, emphasizes the importance of the road to Anna. So we know why this road is important to Anna because we read the text, but the author wants to make sure that that gets across to us. So they repeat this word road multiple times so that we get that this road is important to Anna. So our second sound device is alliteration, which is the repetition of consonant sounds. And the example it gives us is the one that we picked out from the text. We've got perpetually poised, proper. So that's the repetition of that p sound, the consonant sound p that P makes there. So we have to figure out why would they use alliteration here? Why would they want this p sound to be repeated and perpetually poised proper? So if you go back up, we made ourselves a little note in the text that using that alliteration, perpetually poised proper, kind of makes it seem like Anna has to be very stiff or rigid whenever she's around Princess Sophia because Princess Sophia expects that of her. So I would say that the author definitely wants to use this hard p sound to show the reader um, that Anna has to be very careful, sharp, and formal. So they create a careful, sharp, or formal tone, right? But whenever you are reading in the text here, when you have that p sound, who expected her personal servant to be perpetually poised, proper, and silent, it kind of slows down your reading. Whenever you have that hard p sound, you have to make sure that you slow your reading down so you enunciate all of the syllables in those words because it has that hard p sound at the beginning. So I'm going to say the author uses this hard p sound, uses this hard p sound to slow the reader down. And then I'm gonna even go further and say that it creates a careful, sharp, or formal tone. Okay, so now let's look at our last sound device, which is assonance. And we know assonance is the repetition of those vowel sounds. So in our text, we said a good example of assonance would be the repetition of the E sound in beamed, dreamily, and stream. So I'm going to write those examples here. So I've got beamed, dreamily, and stream. I think my pen is starting to be a little difficult as well. Maybe it'll hold up. We'll see. So we've got our example. So now we have to figure out why the author chose to have this repeating E sound in beamed, dreamily, and stream. So we talked about in the text how that repetition of that vowel sound kind of it's like it helps the words flow together. It kind of reminds me of like this is gonna sound odd, but like almost like a water flowing, beamed, dreamily, and stream. And maybe it's that word stream that's doing it. But it kind of helps it creates like a very calm or relaxed tone almost. So I'm gonna say that that repeated vowel sound helps the words flow together like water, creating a calm, peaceful tone. So the repeating vowel sounds flow together like water. Creating a calm, peaceful tone. Because we know all repetition, it all works together to contribute to the overall tone and meaning of the text. So we have done our chart for our sound devices, and we've talked about how they impact the meaning or the tone. So now we have to move on to our writing portion, and our directions say that we are going to describe how the examples we found impact the story's meaning and tone. So we're going to use what we just put in the chart. We're going to add it all together basically into one paragraph and talk about how the examples we found impact the story's meaning and tone. So it's already all there for you. I want you to take a minute, put together what you filled out in your chart in complete sentences to tell me how our examples impact the story's meaning and tone. All right, so I'm going to let you do this on your own, and I want you to come back and check your answer with mine. Okay, so see what you can come up with. I will see you guys very shortly. All right, guys, we are back. So let's go ahead and go over the correct answer for the writing portion. So once again, you had to describe how the examples we found in the text impacted the story's overall meaning and tone. So we already filled out the chart. We already talked about how those examples impact the meaning and the tone. You just had to put it in paragraph form. So right now you're going to check your answer with mine. And my answer is that the author uses word repetition, alliteration, and assonance